Alright, this is Razer's Moray. So this is their first set of IEMs, or their first set of proper IEMs as we may know it, which means IEMs of now, technically, I guess they have been, are finally mainstream. Something we've been trying to do for a very long time, but have Razer done it right? Is it good? Well, let's talk about it. Now, before I get into everything, of course, I actually bought this with my own money because I was very curious about how it sounded, and I just really had to have them to really know, because to preface things, when I started this channel, after some time, I started becoming a person trying to make IEMs a thing in, like, the gaming space. Because back in the day, it just wasn't a thing. People were very much into, like, headphones, and that's basically it. Not really too many people actually use earbuds or IEMs, even though there's a whole bunch out there and there's a whole bunch of benefits, especially if you're playing like more competitive shooter games. And slowly over time I started to see that change, and IEMs have become more mainstream to the point where I've seen Antlion, the guys who make the mod mic, they've made like a set of IEMs as well as a microphone for IEMs, which is fantastic. But with the fact that now Razer has their own set of IEMs as well, this is like a major milestone for those in the IEM community, especially if you're a gamer in this community. So this is a pretty exciting moment for me and anyone else, I guess, in the IEM space who is a really big gamer. But once again, we got to find out if Razer did it right. So with that being said, I've actually tested these already. Let's get started. Alright, now starting with the box, it's basically like any other Razer product in a black and green box with the picture of the product in front, as well as some details in the front. And the main headliner here is being that it's using a full range, non-fatiguing audio, and we'll be the judge of that later. But anyway, inside the box, the contents are pretty standard for a set of IEMs. You're gonna get the IEMs themselves, in which case they're connected to the cable, and this is a pretty long cable, and this cable does use an MMCX connector. You're also gonna get this leatherette carrying case with some accessories on the inside, and inside this little accessory thing, there are the other ear tips. You get foam tips and silicone tips of your choices. For those who are very eagle-eyed, you may notice that there's no medium like foam tips inside that case, and it's because they're already on the IEMs. So it seems like they really want you to try foam tips to see if you like it or not before going to like any other kind of tips. But anyway, aside from that, inside the little side compartment in the pouch, you will find a little carabiner which you can attach to the carrying case in case you want to hook this carrying case to like your backpack or something. Now, if we look at the cable itself, it's definitely one of those longer cables, and it's got this twist braid design with a very matte kind of feel to it. I think it's alright, but for the price point, I think it's pretty good. At the split, we get this metal barrel splitter, which is nice, and they also do have a chin slider, so it's pretty clear that Razer has been looking at other companies and what they're doing with their IEMs and whatnot, because, yeah. Sometimes you don't get a chin slider. And sometimes you don't get a microphone, which this doesn't have, which is very strange considering that these are designed for gaming. You would have expected a microphone on this, especially at its current price point, but they decided to leave it out, which is, personally, I think is kind of stupid. Anyway, beyond the split, the cable splits into two twist braids, which feel fairly durable, which is nice, and they terminate into ear hooks, which is pretty common in IEMs these days, of course. This is exactly what I was gonna expect. And of course, if you just in case you weren't paying attention, these are using MMCX connectors, in case you want to buy like a different set of cables and whatnot for the IEMs. So bear that in mind. Now, as for the IEMs themselves, they feel very light and feel relatively well built. They do have that more ergonomic shape and design with all the curves and contours and whatnot. So it's clear that Razer has been looking at the IEM market for a good amount of time to decide on the shape, and this is the kind of stuff I like to see. Though fit into your ears will vary from person to person when it comes to these kinds of ergonomics and whatnot. And if we look under the ear tip to take a look at the nozzle isn't too long, which I personally do prefer, and it seems to be a 1 or 2 piece design, and it looks to be well built. And of course, for the grill situation, you get a little metal grill. This is pretty standard. So overall, so far, so good. Now, when it comes to the fit into your ears, I think it does a pretty okay job. The ergonomic shape does feel nice in my ears personally, with the IEMs being a relatively like medium smallish kind of shape. So I think most people should be able to fit these in the ears quite comfortably, though your mileage will vary depending on what ear tips you use and the shape of your ears and whatnot. But considering the shape and design, I think most people won't have a problem. If you do, I would try playing around with the ear tips, because while this did come standard with the foam tips on, I personally don't prefer that, and I swapped to silicone tips because that's what I personally prefer, and that's what I find to fit in my ear comfortably for a long period of time compared to foam tips. Now, back on the feel of them, I do think Razer did a pretty good job. They fit well, and I have been able to wear these for long hours playing games. But of course, once again, your mileage will vary depending on shape and size of your ear and which tips you fit on, so do take this with a grain of salt. Looks-wise, these things don't stand out too much, which is good. They don't stick out enormously because they're fairly small in the ears and go quite flush with the head. So I'd imagine like these will just kind of blend in with your head, which is good. So if you're like a person who doesn't like to have earbuds that really stand out, or you're a streamer who just wants them to chill in your ears quite comfortably, I think these things will do a pretty good job. Now I will say that these things do actually have really good passive noise cancellation, so while listening to like music or playing games, I couldn't hear a thing in my outside world, which was both a good thing and a bad thing, depending on if I need to be hearing things outside in the world, you know? Alright, let's get into the thing that everyone's been waiting for, and that is the sound of these guys. Did Razer do a good job, or did they done goof? From the various videos out there, people either really like it, or they really don't. It's kind of polarizing, and in my opinion, I'm kind of in the middle. These things are just okay. From my perspective, I'm looking at these things as a gamer product versus being an audiophile product. And even then, I still have to look at it as, you know, through an audiophile's ears. So, in that respect, if you're going to be using these for music, then I understand why you think these aren't that great. If you're going to be using these for gaming, then it gets a little bit more interesting. It's a little bit more complicated than saying it's perfectly fine, because there's definitely something Razer's trying to try here. Now, to get some perspective, let's dig in more into like how this essentially presents itself. So at the low end, the bass is just okay. It doesn't have the greatest reach into the lower bass region, so it's not the most rumbly sound. There is only just a bit of rumble, and it's whatever, you know. And if we move up the bass range a little bit to like the mid bass, it's okay as well, but there's more of that than the lower bass, so you're gonna feel more punch than there's gonna be like rumble. And even then, the punch isn't like super strong, so it's not like bass head level strong, but it's not necessarily like audio, you know, quote unquote audiophile flat level strong either. So it's not like anemic, it's not very strong, it's just kind of mid, if that makes sense. It's there, it's okay, it makes a feel, and it's alright. Cleanliness is just okay, and with, I don't know, it's a very mid bass, if that makes sense. And the bass doesn't bleed into the mids, which is good. That's one thing that's not mid about it. But if we get to the mids are also kind of, I wouldn't say they're mid, they're kind of interesting. They are forward, and they have some degree of detail, but also lack clarity and sound a bit hollow at times. There's, especially with voices, it's an interesting mid-range. There's an openness to it, while also being kind of constrained, and that has more to do with like the soundstage, I suppose. It's a very interestingly presented mid-range, and I think it's because of the way it is set up, if that makes sense. Like the lower mids are more forward than the mid-mids and the upper mids, but then it starts to go back up as soon as you go to the highs, in which case you have a slightly similar situation where it's slightly forward and you get a good amount of detail that could be more clean to have a little bit more clarity, much like the mids. But on the bright side, it doesn't get ultra bright, though I did find a few times when it gets high and it gets a little bit harsh, but it was very uncommon where that was the case, though. In certain situations where that sound, those really, really high sounds are more present, say I'm playing Caustic in Apex Legends, and I'm putting down a stink bomb, now the sound is high and a little bit jarring at times. It's a bit much in that high range, so, you know, do bear that in mind if you're high sensitive. So a thing on the box where it says it's a non-fatiguing sound, that is only half true. So, you know, they kind of done goofed in that department. Now, as for the soundstage and the imaging, it was small. It wasn't great. It was smaller than I was hoping for. The stage itself wasn't very wide, wasn't very deep, but interestingly was very round. So while it didn't have a lot of width and size to it that I would have expected, it is a round soundstage, and that is good for gaming. So it's interesting because I feel like the roundness, that's good and all, but can we get more size out of it? Maybe with some EQing. So kind of an interesting choice here, but we'll talk a little bit about that later, I guess, for gaming. So we're almost there, so let's also talk about imaging. So the imaging of these guys is okay, not pinpoint by any means, but generally good enough. They will work, they'll pass, and then that lends itself to competitive shooter games, where I think these things surprisingly do a pretty okay job. If not an amazing job, but a pretty okay job. I think the soundstage being very round was good for directional abilities, like there is a good sense of height. And that is something that a lot of IEMs struggle with. So these things do give a sense of height, but are sort of limited due to the smaller size of the stage. So when it comes to the imaging from around and above, while it is okay, you do get height, and that's nice. Now, in the past, I have argued that having a smaller soundstage is technically a good thing, especially in competitive shooters, because you can hear enemies far away earlier on, and that is a tactical advantage. However, I still stand by that, but still, I do think there is a point where the stage can feel a little bit small, in which case you have to adjust the way you hear, because with a smaller stage, that means differences in sound from someone being really far away to someone kind of far away to someone at a medium range. The differences in those sounds will be much closer and harder to discern, and you really have to train your ears for this, and that can be a bit difficult to do, especially in the midst of a great battle. So if there's like an enemy sneaking around you like really medium and one really long and one really close, it's a little bit difficult to differentiate how far away some of those enemies actually are. So there is that. That's why I kind of want the stage just to be just a smidge bigger, so I can have a little bit more of that differentiation room. But I will say that the sound separation on the Morays is actually not bad at all. You know, it's kind of weird. So you know, there's a lot of ups and downs, but still, a slightly larger stage would be nice. Now, with all these nice things being said for these guys for competitive shooter games, I still wouldn't say that these are the best if you're like a really sweaty shooter, but if you're a shooter who's kind of sweaty, who wants to have some fun and have a really nice intense sound, I think that's where these things really shine. The sound of these guys, due to the tuning, while it does sound strange on paper, and this is much more for like music where it sounds really weird. In games, especially shooter games in particular, I found it to be a very fun sound. It was an interestingly, like, very intense kind of sound. Bullets sound amazing. Footsteps, easy to find. Explosions sound great. It is an exciting sound, and when I was playing games, if I'm like in a firefight or just traveling around, I think it was a very exciting experience. It was intense, and I like that a lot because I'm not like a super sweaty person who wants to just purely win. If you're that kind of person, your IEM set would be definitely going to be different. But if you're someone who likes to play these games and you're not a super mega hard sweaty person, then I can imagine these things being a great choice. However, while it is good for this type of enjoyment when it comes to, like, say, non-competitive games, while the sound is intense, I think the size of the stage, once again, is kind of limiting. If it was larger and had more lower bass and a more expansive, like, stage, I think it would do great in non-competitive games where the world is big and open and you really want to experience and immerse yourself, which these things only do just an okay job at doing. The immersion is not the greatest, it's about average. Though, if you're playing a game that's non-competitive or maybe competitive, say a fighting game, I found these things to be pretty fun for fighting games because it made every sound of impact so strong and impactful. It was a fun experience for these type of games. So in that respect, I think these are great for those kind of games. Alright, now with all that being said, would I recommend these guys? And the answer is maybe, but mostly no. Because the price of these guys is $130, and that's a lot to be asking for the quality of sound we're getting out of these guys. A few years ago, this would have been fine at that price, but in this current year, probably not. There's just a lot of IEMs out there that essentially sound better and will perform better for different specific cases and whatnot of gaming that you'd be playing. But that being said, you know, there does seem to be a target market that Razer is trying to target, and it's those who play competitive shooter games, and probably accidentally, as a consequence, fighting games. Because of the intensive sound, it's a very fun and engaging experience, as I've mentioned before. And I had a great time playing shooter games with these guys. I had a great time playing fighting games with these guys because everything just sounded so cool. It was great. It was fun. And in competitive shooters, I was still able to find people. Was it super mega pinpoint accurate? Not necessarily, but I still was able to find people. And yeah, sometimes the intensity was a little bit distracting here and there trying to track footsteps, but it was fun. So it's clear that Razer wants to target those people. No one in like the super targeted extremes, I guess, and no one technically in the non-competitive, more open world kind of market. It's like shooter games for the most part, and anything that seems to play similarly close to it. And even then, at that target market, this is still a high asking price to, you know, be paying. So for the most part, I don't know if I can recommend these guys at its current price. At a sale, I guess, but even then, you'd still have to be like using these for those particular use cases to really kind of enjoy it. Because if you're going to be going outside of like those spaces, or even in those spaces, you can pick better IEMs. If you want something that does a better job in competitive shooters for that competitive experience and you want to listen to everything, you can get the Moondrop Stellaris, which I just reviewed. Those things do a great job in competitive shooters, but they don't do well in outside that area. So if you want something that does a good job out there, you can get the Starfield. You want to save a bit of money on that, and with a similar sound, you can get get the Moondrop Aria Snow, and if you want less of that sparkle, just get the regular Moondrop Aria. Go a little bit cheaper than that, you can also get the Tin T3 Pluses, which I think I do have lying around, as I was testing them earlier with these guys. Right here, it is 10 T3 Pluses. These also sound really good and do a great job. They are not intense, though. Neither are the other guys. Those aren't very intense. But they sound a lot better and are better for those all-around uses and whatnot. And these things cost way less, you know? There is that. So, I don't know. It's like Razer is on the right trajectory, but their pricing is not for the quality, because it's at this price, the sound's got to be really clean, and that's not necessarily what I got. It could be a lot cleaner in my opinion, and it could be tuned a little bit better, but I don't know. I guess I was excited and then a little disappointed, but at the same time, when I was using it for those types of games, I kind of get it. So yeah, that's my thoughts. If these things are on a massive sale and you're going to be playing competitive shooters and fighting games, sure, why not? But at the current price, no. And I digress. I've been on to it. I've been on this for too long. I don't know. I was expecting a lot more, but with that being said, maybe they'll see this video, and in the second version, it'll be better. It'll be cleaner, you know? So I guess that's all I got today. So I guess see you guys next time. Catch you around.